My wife, Emily, and I always prioritize time with our extended family. My sister Rachel, her husband Mark, and their 2 kids were especially close. But everything changed one day when Mark invited Emily to lunch, a seemingly innocent gesture that hid a much darker motive. Emily brought it up casually the night before. Mark asked me to lunch tomorrow, she said, her tone thoughtful. He says there's something important he needs to talk to me about. I frowned. Did he say what it's about? No, Emily replied, shaking her head. Do you think he and Rachel are having problems? The idea seemed unlikely. Rachel and Mark appeared solid, partners who supported each other in everything. Maybe he just needs advice or someone to vent to, I said, brushing it off. The next morning, Emily dressed for work, her expression betraying some lingering unease. I still can't figure out what he wants to talk about, she admitted. Don't worry about it, I reassured her. Just hear him out. If it's something we need to help with, we will. The cafe was busy when Emily arrived for the lunch meeting. She chose a table by the window, her nerves fading slightly as the lively chatter around her made her feel less conspicuous. Mark arrived shortly after, but as he approached, Emily immediately noticed something was off. His usual easygoing demeanor was replaced by a nervous energy. Hey, he said, sitting down quickly. Hi, Mark. Is everything okay? Emily asked. For the first few minutes, Mark avoided the topic he'd brought her here to discuss. Instead, he asked about work, the kids, and other everyday things. Emily later told me that she could tell he was building up to something, but nothing could have prepared her for what came next. As their food arrived, Mark finally leaned forward, his hands gripping the edge of the table. Emily, there's something I need to tell you, he said, his voice shaky. Emily nodded cautiously, expecting him to open up about his marriage or a personal struggle. Instead, he said something that left her speechless. I've been in love with you for years, Mark confessed. Emily froze, her brain struggling to process his words. What? She finally managed to say. Mark's words tumbled out in a rush. I've been holding it in for so long. I couldn't keep it to myself anymore. You're incredible, Emily, beautiful, kind, smart. You're everything I've ever wanted. Emily shook her head, her shock quickly turning to anger. Mark, stop. You're married to my sister. I know, he said, his voice trembling. But I can't help how I feel. If you were mine, I'd treat you like a queen. I'd give you everything you deserve. Emily stood abruptly, the legs of her chair screeching against the floor. I can't believe this, she said, her voice shaking. This is wrong, Mark. Don't ever talk to me like this again. She walked out of the cafe without looking back. That evening, Emily sat me down and told me everything. Her hands were trembling as she spoke, her voice a mix of disbelief and anger. I couldn't believe what I was hearing, she said. He told me he's been in love with me for years. Years, Jake. And he thought it was okay to say that to me? I stared at her, my mind racing. Mark? The guy who always seemed so grounded? The guy we trusted implicitly? I don't even know what to say, I admitted. My disbelief quickly turned into fury. How could he betray Rachel like this? How could he put Emily in such an uncomfortable position? As if on cue, Emily's phone buzzed. It was a text from Mark. I'm sorry for what I said, the message read. I wasn't thinking clearly. Please don't tell Rachel. I swear it won't happen again. Another text followed minutes later, it was a mistake. I'll keep my distance from now on. Just don't say anything. Please. The texts kept coming, alternating between apologies and desperate pleas. Answer him, I told Emily. Put him on speaker. I need to hear this for myself. Reluctantly, Emily called him back. Mark answered almost immediately. Emily, I'm so sorry, he said, his voice shaking. I thought there was something between us. There's not, Emily said firmly. There never has been. How could you even think that? I don't know, he stammered. I guess I misread things. I thought last weekend, in your kitchen, there was a connection. Emily's face twisted in disgust. There was no connection, she snapped. You're imagining things. I finally spoke, unable to hold back any longer. Mark, this needs to stop, I said coldly. You're delusional. Emily doesn't feel anything for you. You need to take responsibility for your actions. Mark's voice cracked. Does Rachel know? Not yet, I said. But she's going to. No, please, he begged. It'll destroy my family. Don't tell her. I'll never say anything like this again. I swear. I hung up, unable to listen to him grovel any longer. That night, Emily and I stayed up late discussing what to do. She was adamant that Rachel needed to know the truth, but I hesitated. What will this do to her kids? I asked. What if this destroys their family? What about me? Emily countered. He crossed a line, Jake. If we don't tell Rachel, he'll think he can get away with this. I knew she was right, but I still couldn't shake the thought of Rachel's life crumbling because of Mark's betrayal. Let me talk to him one more time, I said finally. If he doesn't take responsibility, we'll tell Rachel ourselves. Emily reluctantly agreed, though I could see how much the situation was weighing on her. The next day, I called Mark. He answered on the first ring. Have you thought about what I said? He asked nervously. This isn't a discussion, I said flatly. You need to tell Rachel the truth, or I will. There was a long pause before he replied. I'll tell her, he said quietly. Just give me some time. You have until tonight, I said. If you haven't told her by then, I'm doing it myself. That night, my phone rang. It was Rachel. When I answered Rachel's call that night, the tension in her voice confirmed my worst fear. Mark hadn't told her the truth. Instead, he'd spun a web of lies. Jake, can you and Emily come over? She asked. Mark told me something, and I need to talk to you both. Her tone was sharp, a mix of anger and confusion, and I knew immediately that Mark was trying to flip the story. We'll be there soon, I said, keeping my voice calm even though my heart was racing. The drive to Rachel's house was silent. Emily sat rigid in the passenger seat, her jaw clenched. He's trying to save himself, she said finally, breaking the silence. I know, I replied. But we have proof. Rachel will see through his lies. When we arrived, Rachel was waiting in the living room. Her arms were crossed, and her expression was a mix of fury and hurt. Mark told me Emily has been flirting with him, she said bluntly. He claims she made a move on him yesterday. Emily's face turned red with shock and anger. What? She said, her voice rising. Rachel, that's not true. He's the one who came on to me. Rachel's eyes darted between the two of us. He said you've been giving him signals for months, she continued, her voice trembling. He said he rejected you, but he's worried this will tear the family apart. I stepped forward, my tone calm but firm. Rachel, he's lying to you. Emily hasn't done anything. Mark told her he's been in love with her for years. When she rejected him, he panicked and tried to twist the story. Rachel hesitated, uncertainty flickering across her face. Why would he lie about something like this? Because he's desperate, Emily said, her voice trembling with emotion. He knows he messed up, and he's trying to protect himself. Rachel, I would never do that to you. Rachel studied Emily's face, her expression softening. Do you have any proof? Emily nodded. Yes, she said. You need to see this. Emily handed Rachel her phone and showed her the texts Mark had sent after his confession. Rachel read through them in silence, her face growing darker with each message. Then Emily played the voicemails, letting Rachel hear Mark's trembling voice begging her not to tell anyone. When the last voicemail ended, Rachel sat back, her hands shaking. He told me he rejected you, she said softly, her voice tinged with disbelief. But this is the opposite. Emily nodded, tears in her eyes. Rachel, I'm so sorry you're going through this. I didn't want to hurt you, but you deserve to know the truth. Rachel's jaw tightened, and her hands clenched into fists. Where is he? He's upstairs, I said. Rachel stood abruptly and marched toward the stairs. Emily and I followed, unsure of what would happen next. We found Mark sitting in the bedroom, staring blankly at the floor. When Rachel stormed in, his head snapped up. Rachel, I can explain. Explain what? She interrupted, her voice shaking with fury. Explain how you've been lying to me for years. Explain how you thought you could blame Emily to cover your own disgusting behavior. Mark stood, his hands raised defensively. I panicked, okay? I didn't know what to do. I was scared you'd leave me. Rachel's voice was icy. You should be scared, she said. I've seen the texts. I've heard the voicemails. Do you think I'm stupid, Mark? Do you think I wouldn't figure it out? Mark's face crumpled, and he began to cry. I'm sorry, he said, his voice cracking. I never meant for any of this to happen. I love you, Rachel. I love our family. Don't you dare talk about love, Rachel spat. You've destroyed our family. Pack your things and get out. I don't want to see you in this house tonight. Mark tried to argue. Rachel, please. Let me explain. I'll go to therapy, I'll fix this. Just don't throw me out. Rachel's expression didn't waver. Get out. Mark turned to me, his eyes pleading. Jake, please, help me. You've got to understand. I don't need to understand anything, I said coldly. You did this to yourself. Mark nodded slowly, his shoulders slumping in defeat. He began gathering his things, and we left him to it. Downstairs, Rachel sank onto the couch, her face pale. Emily sat beside her, placing a hand on her shoulder. Are you okay? Emily asked gently. Rachel let out a bitter laugh. I don't know. I don't think I've ever been this angry in my life. Her hands were shaking as she reached for her phone. How long has this been going on? She asked. Emily hesitated. I don't know exactly, she admitted. But there's something else you should see. Rachel frowned. What do you mean? Emily glanced at me, and I stepped in. We found a folder on Mark's laptop, I said carefully. It's full of pictures of Emily. Some of them date back years. Rachel stared at me, her expression shifting from confusion to horror. What kind of pictures? They're not normal, Emily said, her voice trembling. They're just of me, close-ups, taken without my knowledge. I didn't even know they existed until recently. Rachel stood abruptly. Where's his laptop? Upstairs, I said. Without another word, Rachel marched back up the stairs. She found the laptop on Mark's desk and opened it, her hands shaking as she typed in the password. On the third try, she got in. The folder wasn't hard to find. It was labeled innocuously, but when Rachel opened it, the screen filled with thumbnails of photos. There were hundreds of them. Pictures of Emily at family gatherings, on vacation, and even candid shots at home. Most were zoomed in on her face or body, clearly taken without her knowledge. Rachel scrolled through the photos, her face pale with shock. He took these right in front of me, she whispered. Emily stood behind her, her hand covering her mouth. I trusted him, she said softly. I thought he was safe because he was family. Rachel slammed the laptop shut. This is sick, she said. I'm calling a lawyer first thing in the morning. Mark came downstairs a short time later, his bag slung over his shoulder. Rachel didn't look at him. I've seen the pictures, she said coldly. Mark froze, his face going pale. Rachel's voice was steady but firm. Don't come back here, she said. You're done. Mark nodded, unable to speak. He left without another word. After Mark left, the house was quiet, but the weight of everything he had done hung heavily in the air. Rachel sat at the kitchen table, staring blankly at her hands while Emily and I stood nearby, unsure of how to help. I don't even know how to explain this to the kids, Rachel said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. They don't need to know all the details, Emily said gently. Just enough to help them understand why things are changing. Rachel nodded, her face pale. I need to protect them from him, she said. He might be their father, but he's not the man I thought he was. How could I have been so blind? None of this is your fault, I said. He fooled all of us. But now we know who he really is, and we can make sure he can't hurt anyone else. Rachel took a deep breath, then stood up abruptly. There might be more, she said. If he's been hiding this obsession, who knows what else he's been hiding? Emily and I exchanged a glance. Rachel had already gone through Mark's laptop, but the idea of uncovering even more secrets felt overwhelming. Still, Rachel was determined. Over the next few hours, we helped Rachel sift through Mark's belongings. We started in the basement, where Mark kept boxes of personal items. Most of it was unremarkable, old work gear, photo albums, and childhood memorabilia, but eventually, Rachel stumbled upon something that sent a chill down all our spines. In the back of a storage shelf, hidden beneath some old blankets, Rachel found a small locked box. She brought it upstairs and set it on the table, her hands trembling. "What do you think is inside?" she asked, her voice tight with anxiety. "There's only one way to find out," I said. Using a screwdriver, I pried the lock open. Inside were notebooks, loose photographs, and a flash drive. Rachel picked up one of the notebooks, flipping it open to the first page. Her face went pale as she began to read. "These are about Emily," she whispered. "What do you mean?" Emily asked, stepping closer. Rachel handed her the notebook. The pages were filled with scrawled entries, obsessive, rambling thoughts about Emily. "She's perfect," one entry read. "Her smile, her laugh, the way she moves, it's like she's meant for me. Why can't she see it?" Emily's hands shook as she flipped through more pages. The entries grew darker, detailing moments Mark had fixated on her during family gatherings. "I need to find a way to tell her how I feel," one entry said. "If I could just get her alone, I know she'd understand. She'd see how good we'd be together." Rachel buried her face in her hands. How could he write this? How could he sit at the same table with us, knowing he was thinking these things? I clenched my fists, struggling to keep my anger in check. "This goes beyond infatuation," I said. "This is obsession." The flash drive held more of the same, photos of Emily, saved screenshots of her social media posts, and even recordings of family gatherings. Mark had been secretly documenting moments with Emily for years. "He's been building this fantasy in his head," Emily said quietly. "But it's all based on lies. I never gave him any reason to think I felt the same way." Rachel's resolve hardened as she sorted through the evidence. "I'm taking all of this to my lawyer," she said. "He needs to be held accountable." The next day, Rachel met with her lawyer and provided them with the notebooks, the photos, and the flash drive. The lawyer assured her that the evidence would strengthen her case for custody and help establish boundaries to protect her and the kids from Mark's behavior. "This isn't just about divorce," Rachel said as we sat with her that evening. "It's about making sure he can't hurt anyone else. What if he fixates on someone else the way he did on Emily?" The thought was chilling, but Rachel's determination was unwavering. She filed for a restraining order against Mark that same week, citing his obsessive and inappropriate behavior. Mark, however, wasn't ready to disappear quietly. A few days after being served with the restraining order, he sent Emily an email from a new account. The subject line simply read, "Please read this." Against my advice, Emily opened it. The email began with another apology, but like his previous messages, it quickly devolved into a rambling confession. "I never got to finish what I wanted to say," he wrote. "There's so much you don't understand. I know I scared you, but I didn't mean to. I just wanted to tell you how I feel. I needed you to know that you're the only person who's ever made me feel this way." The email went on to criticize me directly, implying that I didn't appreciate Emily the way she deserved. "I've watched the way he treats you," Mark wrote. "He doesn't see how incredible you are. If I were in his place, I'd never take you for granted." Emily's hands were shaking as she read the email aloud to me. "This is delusional," she said. "How can he still think this is okay?" I took the laptop from her and forwarded the email to Rachel and her lawyer. "This is more evidence for the court," I said. Rachel called later that night, furious. "He's completely lost it," she said. "I don't care what it takes, I'm going to make sure he doesn't get away with this." The discovery of Mark's journal and the email were turning points. They showed just how deep his obsession ran and how far he was willing to go to justify his actions. Rachel's lawyer assured her that the restraining order and the divorce proceedings were moving forward smoothly. In the meantime, Rachel began working with a child psychologist to prepare her kids for the changes in their lives. "They need stability," Rachel said. "I don't want them to feel like their world is falling apart because of this." The psychologist suggested keeping the explanation simple. "Just tell them that mommy and daddy won't be living together for a while," she advised. "You don't need to share the details right now." Rachel followed the advice, sitting her kids down one afternoon and gently explaining the situation. They were confused but resilient, and Rachel's calm demeanor helped ease their fears. Mark, on the other hand, had grown increasingly unstable. His messages became less frequent but more erratic, each one a mix of apologies, confessions, and veiled threats. Emily blocked every new email address, but the damage had already been done. As we sat in our living room one evening, Emily looked at me and sighed. "Do you think he'll ever stop?" she asked. "He'll have no choice," I said firmly. "Rachel's taking control of the situation. And as long as we stick together, he won't be able to hurt us." Rachel was resolute. The evidence against Mark, the photos, the journal, the emails, painted a picture of a man whose obsession had crossed every imaginable line. With her lawyer's help, she filed for full custody of the kids, citing the restraining order and Mark's increasingly unstable behavior as proof that he was unfit to be around them unsupervised. Mark had moved out of the house entirely by this point, staying with a friend while the legal process unfolded. His once confident demeanor had given way to something broken and desperate, and he seemed to be unraveling under the weight of his own actions. "He's called me 3 times today," Rachel told me during one of our phone calls. I didn't answer. "I forward everything to my lawyer now. I'm done engaging with him." Emily and I had also cut off all contact with Mark. Though he had tried to reach Emily several times through new email accounts, we forwarded each message directly to Rachel's lawyer and ignored them. Mark's words, always a mix of apologies and delusions, only reinforced how dangerous his obsession had become. Rachel's focus shifted entirely to her kids. They were her priority now, and she worked tirelessly to ensure they felt safe and secure amid the chaos. She kept their routines as normal as possible, making sure they didn't feel the weight of their father's absence more than necessary. One evening, as Rachel and I sat together in her kitchen while the kids played upstairs, she confided in me. "I keep wondering if I missed something," she said, her voice quiet. "There had to be signs, right? How could I have been so blind?" I shook my head. "Mark went out of his way to hide this from everyone," I said. "It's not your fault. He betrayed all of us, not just you." Rachel's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them away. "I'm not sad anymore," she said after a moment. "I'm just angry. Angry that he's put us in this position. Angry that my kids are going to grow up without their father in the same way. Angry that I trusted him." "You're doing the right thing," I said. "You're protecting yourself and your kids. That's all that matters now." The court hearing for the restraining order was quick. The judge reviewed the evidence Rachel had submitted, including the photos, the journal, and the threatening emails Mark had sent. When it was Mark's turn to speak, he appeared nervous and disheveled, mumbling apologies and insisting that his behavior had been a misunderstanding. "I was confused," he said. "I never meant to hurt anyone." But the evidence spoke for itself. The judge granted Rachel a full restraining order, prohibiting Mark from coming within 500 feet of her, the children, or our home. Additionally, the court granted Rachel temporary full custody of the kids until the divorce proceedings were finalized. Mark barely reacted as the ruling was read. He simply nodded and walked out of the courtroom without making eye contact with anyone. In the weeks that followed, Rachel began to rebuild her life. She leaned on family and friends for support, creating a network that allowed her to focus on healing and moving forward. Emily and I were by her side every step of the way. One afternoon, while we were helping Rachel organize her garage, she turned to Emily. "I want you to know I don't blame you for any of this," Rachel said. "Mark's actions are his alone. You didn't do anything wrong." Emily's eyes welled up with tears. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I've felt so guilty, even though I know this isn't my fault. Hearing you say that means a lot." Rachel smiled, her expression warm despite everything she had been through. "We're family," she said. "And we're not going to let Mark take that away from us." Meanwhile, Mark's presence in our lives continued to fade. He stopped trying to contact Emily, and his attempts to fight Rachel's custody request were half-hearted at best. It seemed he had finally realized the extent of the damage he had caused. Rachel finalized her divorce 6 months later. The court awarded her full custody of the kids, with Mark allowed supervised visitation once a month. Rachel had mixed feelings about the arrangement, but she knew it was important for her children to have some connection with their father, even if it was limited. For Emily and me, the aftermath of Mark's betrayal left its own scars. Emily struggled with lingering anxiety, often questioning her interactions with others and second-guessing her naturally friendly and playful personality. "I don't want anyone to misinterpret me like Mark did," she said one evening as we sat together on the couch. You don't have to change who you are because of him, I told her. What Mark did wasn't your fault. He created his own fantasy, and it had nothing to do with you. Emily nodded, though I could see the weight of the experience still lingering in her eyes. Over time, though, she began to reclaim her sense of normalcy, leaning on me and our friends for support. Months later, as I watched Rachel playing with her kids at a family barbecue, I felt a sense of pride in how far she had come. She had taken a situation that could have broken her and turned it into an opportunity to grow stronger, for herself and her children. Are you okay? Emily asked, sitting down beside me. I nodded, smiling. Yeah, I said. I think we're all going to be okay. Emily followed my gaze to Rachel, who was laughing as her kids splashed her with water from a small pool. She's incredible, Emily said. After everything she's been through, she still finds a way to smile. That's what family does, I said. We pick up the pieces and move forward. Together. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, I realized that while Mark's actions had shaken our family to its core, they hadn't destroyed us. We had weathered the storm, and now, we were stronger for it. Thank you for watching the video. Subscribe and turn on notifications to be the first to have radish and real stories with you. Have a great day.